What if the greatest prison ever built has no walls, no guards, no bars of steel? What if you are living inside it right now, and its architect, its warden, and its sole prisoner is you? This is not a riddle. It is the central, unsettling proposition of a philosophy forged in the fires of ancient Rome and Greece, a philosophy for warriors, emperors, and anyone who has ever felt trapped by their own life. By the end of our time together, you will understand not only the design of this prison, but you will hold in your hand the one master key that unlocks its gate, a key that requires not strength, but a specific kind of sight. And you will learn to spot the invisible tripwires that keep a man shackled to a life of quiet desperation, a life he mistakenly calls fate. Before we proceed into the heart of this discipline, a moment of clarity is required. What follows is a philosophical exploration intended for educational purposes. It is a lens through which to view the architecture of the human mind, not a substitute for professional medical, psychological, or legal counsel. The principles of Stoicism offer a framework for self-reflection and personal resilience, but your life is your own. Your choices and the responsibility for them remain yours alone. This path is one of profound personal accountability. Consult with qualified experts for decisions specific to your individual circumstances. We are here to examine the map, but you must walk the territory. The modern world speaks of fools and foolishness, of men who sabotage their own lives through what is often labeled as stupidity. It's a harsh word, a final judgment. The ancient Stoics, however, saw it differently. They were physicians of the soul, and they understood that what looks like foolishness from the outside is almost always a form of blindness on the inside. It is not a lack of intelligence, but a lack of awareness. It is not a failure of intellect, but a profound and tragic misapplication of it. The man who repeats the same mistakes, who blames the world for his sorrows, who is a slave to his own anger, is not necessarily a man of low IQ. He is a man living asleep at the helm of his own ship, drifting at the mercy of every passing wave and gust of wind, all while believing he is the captain. Carl Jung, centuries later, would echo this ancient sentiment, stating that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. The Stoics would have nodded in agreement. They would say that until you learn to examine your own impressions, your automatic, gut-level judgments about the world you are not living, you are being lived. You are a puppet, and your strings are being pulled by every external event, every casual comment, every fleeting desire. The tragedy is that you will never see the strings. You will only feel the jerk and the pull, and you will curse the heavens for your misfortune. This is the state of unreason, a life lived contrary to our fundamental nature as rational social beings, and it leaves clues. It has a signature, a pattern of behavior that is as predictable as gravity. These are not signs of inherent, permanent stupidity. They are symptoms of a profound disconnection from the one thing a human being can ever truly call their own, their faculty of choice, their reasoned judgment. The most dangerous prison is the one whose walls are invisible, built from the bricks of unexamined belief and the mortar of emotional reaction. The first and most telling symptom of this inner blindness is the illusion of absolute knowledge. The man trapped in unreason believes he has arrived. He mistakes the small island of his own experience for the entire continent of reality. He speaks with the thunderous certainty of a man who has never had to question his own foundations. His opinions are not theories to be tested, they are decrees to be enforced. To disagree with him is not to offer a different perspective. It is a personal insult, an act of rebellion against the established truth, which is, of course, his truth. He listens not to understand, but to reload, waiting for a gap in the conversation to fire his next volley of pre-packaged certainties. The Stoics knew this man well. They understood that this behavior is a defense mechanism of a fragile ego. True confidence, the kind that comes from a deep and honest relationship with oneself, is quiet, flexible, and curious. The wise man, like Socrates, understands that the beginning of wisdom is the admission of ignorance. He knows that the vast ocean of what he does not know will always dwarf the small pond of what he does. The man of unreason, however, cannot tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty. To him, saying, "I don't know," is an admission of weakness. He builds his identity on a foundation of being right, so every challenge to his ideas feels like an earthquake threatening his very existence. He surrounds himself, therefore, not with challengers, but with echoes. He curates a circle of friends and associates who reflect his own views back to him, amplifying his biases until they become an impenetrable fortress of self-deception. He prefers to be the smartest man in a room of sycophants than a student in a room of masters. He scoffs at new ideas, not because he has examined them and found them wanting, but because they are new and therefore threatening to the brittle stability of his worldview. But here is the tragic irony. The man who believes he knows everything is the one who is permanently sealed off from the possibility of learning anything. He is a ship that has dropped anchor in a tiny, polluted harbor, refusing to sail into the vast, open sea of knowledge, all while boasting about his mastery of the tides. His certainty is not a sign of strength. It is the deadbolt on the door of his own prison cell. This refusal to learn is inextricably linked to the second great symptom, the complete abdication of personal responsibility. For the man living in unreason, nothing is ever his fault. He is a permanent victim in the grand drama of his own life. His business failed because of the economy, the unfair competition, the disloyal employees. His relationships crumbled because of his partner's irrationality, his family's meddling, the inherent flaws of the opposite sex. He is the perpetual passenger in a car crash, always pointing a finger from the wreckage, never admitting he was the one with his hands on the wheel. The Stoics had a powerful diagnostic tool for this condition. They called it the dichotomy of control. It is perhaps the most fundamental and life-altering principle in their entire philosophy. It states that some things in the universe are up to us and some things are not. What is up to us? Our judgments, our intentions, our choices, our actions, the inner world of our own mind. What is not up to us? Everything else. Our health, our wealth, our reputation, the actions of other people, the weather, the past, the future. We can influence these things, certainly, but we do not have absolute control over them. They are external to our will. The man of unreason lives his entire life in a state of violent confusion about this boundary. He desperately tries to control what is external to him, the opinions of others, the outcome of events, the feelings of his loved ones, while completely neglecting the one domain where he has total sovereignty, his own mind. Because he cannot control the world, he feels perpetually frustrated, angry, and powerless. And because he refuses to take control of his mind, he is a slave to its every whim. To take responsibility would mean turning his gaze inward. It would mean asking the terrifying question, what role did my own judgments, my own actions, my own unexamined habits play in creating this outcome? This is a journey into the self that his ego cannot withstand. It is easier to cast himself as the noble, misunderstood hero in a world designed to thwart him. Blaming others is a form of anesthetic. It numbs the pain of self-reflection, but it also guarantees that the disease will never be cured. The moment you place the blame for your life on something external, you surrender your power to change it. You become a child in a world of adults, waiting for someone else to fix what you have broken. A wise man, a Stoic practitioner, understands that the world owes him nothing. Events are just events. They are raw material. The true measure of a person is what they build with that material. When faced with failure, he asks not, "Who did this to me?" but "What can I learn from this?" What part of this is within my control to change going forward? He sees every obstacle as a sparring partner, an opportunity to practice virtue, courage, patience, justice, wisdom. He knows that while he cannot choose what happens to him, he can always choose how he responds. This is the source of his unshakable freedom. The man who blames others is a slave to circumstance. The man who takes responsibility is the master of his own soul, even in chains. I once knew a man, let's call him Marcus, who was the CEO of a rapidly growing tech company. He was brilliant, charismatic, and utterly convinced of his own infallibility. He fit the archetype perfectly. He believed he knew everything, and nothing was ever his fault. In meetings, he didn't foster debate. He held court. Any engineer who raised a concern about a product timeline was labeled a naysayer. Any marketing lead who questioned his strategy was deemed not a team player. He surrounded himself with executives who learned that the fastest way to advance was to agree with him. His worldview was the company's reality. For a time, it worked. The force of his personality and a favorable market propelled the company forward. But beneath the surface, the rot was setting in. He ignored feedback from his senior team about a competitor's new technology, dismissing it as irrelevant. He pushed for a massive new product launch based on his gut feeling, overruling data that suggested the market wasn't ready. When key employees started leaving, he blamed their lack of loyalty, their inability to handle the pressure. He never once considered that his own tyrannical leadership style was the cause. The downfall was as swift as it was predictable. The competitor he ignored released their product and captured a huge market share. His own rushed product launched to a disastrous reception, plagued by bugs his engineers had tried to warn him about. The company's stock plummeted. In the final, desperate board meeting, as they moved to oust him, he delivered a blistering speech, blaming the board's cowardice, the media's unfairness, and the market's stupidity. He was a general blaming his soldiers for a battle he had lost through his own arrogance. He had controlled a multi-million-dollar corporation, but he could not control the 1 square foot of territory that mattered, the space between his own 2 ears. He had built an external empire and allowed his inner citadel to fall into ruin. His story is a chilling testament to the fact that you can have all the intelligence and power in the world, but if you do not understand the dichotomy of control, if you believe you are the exception to the laws of human nature, you are building your palace on a fault line. This inability to look inward naturally gives rise to the third sign of the man living in unreason. He is a tempest of uncontrolled emotion. He is ruled by his passions, not by his reason. He is quick to anger, easily slighted, and his moods swing on the pendulum of external events. His emotional state is not generated from within, it is a reaction to what happens without. A bit of traffic can ruin his morning, a critical comment can sour his day. A minor setback can trigger an outburst of rage or a plunge into despair. He often mistakes this volatility for strength. He sees his anger as a sign of passion, his anxiety as a sign of caring, his dramatic displays as proof of his authenticity. He will say things like, "That's just who I am," as if his character were a fixed and unchangeable monolith. The Stoics would call this the most dangerous lie of all. They taught that our emotions are not mysterious forces that happen to us. They are the direct result of our judgments. It is not the event itself that causes distress, but our interpretation of the event. Someone cuts you off in traffic. The event is neutral. A car changed lanes in front of you. The flash of anger you feel comes from a judgment. That person disrespected me. They put me in danger. They think their time is more important than mine. This should not have happened. It is this internal monologue, these rapid-fire, often unconscious judgments that fuel the emotional fire. The man of unreason is completely unaware of this process. He believes the other driver made him angry. He doesn't see that he participated in the creation of his own rage. Because he doesn't understand the source of his emotions, he cannot manage them. He is a man trying to fight a fire by swatting at the smoke, never looking for the embers that started the blaze. He either suppresses his feelings until they explode in a destructive outburst, or he lets them vent freely, leaving a trail of broken relationships and burned bridges in his wake. He creates the very chaos he then complains about. He alienates his colleagues with his temper, then laments his lack of career progression. He pushes away loved ones with his reactivity, then bemoans his loneliness. He is the arsonist who wonders why his world is always on fire. A Stoic learns to become a scientist of his own mind. He practices a critical pause between the external event and his internal response. In that sacred space, he examines the impression. He asks, is this judgment true? Is this interpretation helpful? Is this view of things in accordance with nature and reason? He learns to separate the event from the story he tells himself about the event. This does not mean he becomes an unfeeling robot. Grief, concern, and even pain are natural human responses. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to eliminate the destructive, irrational, and all-consuming passions that arise from faulty judgments. He feels anger, but it does not control him. He feels fear, but it does not paralyze him. He has learned to hold the reins of his own mind, to guide his emotional horses rather than being dragged behind them in the dust. He has emotional weather, like anyone else, but he is the mountain, not the leaf tossed in the wind. He understands that true strength is not the force of an explosion, but the quiet, unshakable resilience of a fortress that cannot be breached from within. Let's consider a different story, one of a slow and painful awakening. There was a carpenter, a man we'll call David. He was a master of his craft, but a disaster in his life. He was a classic case of repeating the same mistakes, a man trapped in a loop he couldn't see. He would take on a client, start a project with enthusiasm, but eventually his emotional volatility would poison the well. If a client requested a small change, he would see it as a criticism of his skill and become defensive. If a payment was a day late, he would fire off an angry email, burning the relationship over a minor issue. He went through apprentices like they were disposable tools, flying into a rage over the smallest error. Consequently, his business was always struggling. He had the talent, but he couldn't maintain the relationships necessary for success. He would tell his friends, "You can't find good clients anymore," or "Young people today have no work ethic." It was always an external problem. In his personal life, the pattern was the same. He would enter a relationship, and for a while, things would be good, but his insecurity and quick temper would inevitably surface. A perceived slight, a moment of jealousy, a misunderstanding, he would react with disproportionate anger, convinced he was being wronged. After each breakup, he would declare that he was simply unlucky in love. The cycle continued for years. He was the craftsman who kept hitting his own thumb with the hammer and blaming the hammer's design. The awakening came not as a single epiphany, but as a slow, grinding collapse. He lost his workshop after a particularly nasty fallout, with a major client left him unable to pay the rent. Around the same time, a long-term partner finally left him, saying, "I can't live in a world where I have to constantly walk on eggshells. The man I love is in there somewhere, but he's buried under all this anger." The loss of his work and his love at the same time broke him. For the first time, he was left with a common denominator he could no longer ignore: himself. There was no one else to blame. In the quiet ruin of his life, he began to ask the right question, not, "Why does this always happen to me?" but, "Why do I always do this?" He started to see the pattern. He saw that his anger wasn't a response to being wronged. It was a defense against a deep-seated fear of not being good enough. The client's change request didn't threaten the project. It threatened his fragile sense of worth. His partner's night out with friends didn't threaten the relationship. It threatened his fear of abandonment. His journey out was not easy. It involved therapy, journaling, and a chance encounter with the writings of Marcus Aurelius. He began to practice the Stoic pause. When he felt the familiar heat of anger rising, he would force himself to stop, to breathe, and to dissect the judgment behind it. He started to treat his emotional reactions not as gospel truth, but as hypotheses to be tested. He learned to separate the event. The client asked for a different type of wood from his catastrophic interpretation. He thinks my judgment is terrible and I'm a failure. It was a slow and painstaking process of untangling the knots in his own mind. He didn't become a different person overnight, but he became a person who was finally aware of his own internal weather patterns. He was no longer drifting, he was learning to navigate. The pain of his collapse was the tuition for the most important lesson of his life. The world is a mirror, and if you don't like the reflection, breaking the mirror will change nothing. You must change the person standing in front of it. This brings us to a crucial element that shapes the inner world, the outer world we choose to inhabit. The fourth sign of the man living out of sync with reason is the company he keeps. He surrounds himself with fools, or more accurately, with people who reinforce his own unreason. Show me a man's friends, and I will show you his future. This is not a platitude, it is a law of psychic gravity. We are porous beings. We absorb the attitudes, habits, and mindsets of those with whom we spend the most time. The man of unreason seeks comfort, not challenge. He avoids people who are smarter, more disciplined, or more virtuous than he is, because their very presence is a quiet indictment of his own mediocrity. They hold up a mirror he does not want to look into. So, he builds a cocoon of complacency. He finds friends who gossip instead of build, who complain instead of solve, who distract instead of develop. In their company, his own vices seem normal, even justified. His laziness is just taking it easy. His cynicism is just being realistic. His lack of ambition is just being content. This circle acts as an echo chamber for his worst impulses, validating his weaknesses and shielding him from the uncomfortable call to grow. This choice is intimately tied to the fifth symptom. He chases fleeting pleasure instead of lasting purpose. He is a creature of appetite, a slave to the next dopamine hit. His life is oriented around the avoidance of discomfort and the pursuit of immediate gratification. Whether it's through mindless scrolling on social media, binge-watching entertainment, excessive food and drink, or the pursuit of empty sexual conquests, his goal is always the same: to distract himself from the quiet, persistent ache of a life devoid of meaning. The Stoics would see this as a life lived in service to the lower self, the part of us that is purely animalistic. They believed that our unique human faculty is our reason, our ability to live according to a higher purpose, which they defined as virtue. A life of virtue, of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance is not a life of grim, joyless sacrifice. On the contrary, they argued it is the only path to time's eudaimonia asterisk, a state of deep, abiding, flourishing, and inner peace. This is a happiness that is stable and resilient because it depends not on external things, but on the quality of one's own character. The pleasure the man of unreason seeks is fragile and fleeting. It is the happiness of the addict, requiring ever-increasing doses to achieve the same effect, and leaving him emptier after each indulgence. He confuses pleasure with happiness, and in doing so, he trades a fulfilling life for a series of cheap thrills. He will choose the easy comfort of the sofa over the demanding effort of the gym. He will choose the instant gratification of junk food over the long-term benefit of healthy eating. He will choose the shallow validation of 1,000 online likes over the deep connection of one meaningful conversation. He builds nothing, he only consumes. He is a leaky vessel, constantly trying to fill a hole that can only be patched from within. This addiction to comfort slowly erodes his character. It weakens his willpower, dulls his ambition, and makes him allergic to the very challenges that forge a strong soul. The ancient Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort. They would periodically sleep on the floor, eat simple food, or wear thin clothing in the cold, not to punish themselves, but to train themselves. They were inoculating themselves against misfortune. They were teaching their minds and bodies that they could endure, that their well-being was not dependent on luxury and ease. They were building their inner fortress, brick by brick. The man who chases pleasure does the opposite. He dismantles his fortress, brick by brick, in search of more comfortable furniture, until one day the storm comes, as it always does, and he finds he has no shelter. His life is a long, slow surrender to the path of least resistance. And the tragedy is, he will wake up one day in his later years, surrounded by the trinkets of his distractions, and feel a profound and hollow regret for the man he could have been, if only he had been willing to choose the difficult path, the path of purpose. But can a person truly change? Can the man who embodies all these traits, the arrogance, the blame, the emotional chaos, the poor company, the hedonism, actually transform? The Stoic answer is a resounding yes, because all of these are symptoms, not the disease itself. The disease is ignorance of one's own power of choice. The cure is awareness and practice. Consider the story of a young soldier. Let's name him Leo. From an early age, Leo was pure impulse. He was aggressive, reactive, and driven by a bottomless need for external validation. In the military, his aggression was an asset. Up to a point, he was a good fighter, but a terrible leader. His men respected his courage, but feared his explosive temper. He chased every pleasure offered to him, adrenaline on the battlefield, reckless partying off of it. He was the epitome of the man ruled by his passions. His transformation began with a catastrophe. During a training exercise, a piece of equipment failed. He suffered a severe injury that ended his military career in an instant. Everything he had built his identity on, his physical strength, his role as a warrior, the constant thrill, was stripped away. He was left with a broken body and a mind in chaos. His anger, once a tool, now became his tormentor. He was furious at the world, at his fate, at his own useless body. He pushed away his family and friends, sinking into a deep depression, the predictable crash after a life lived on artificial highs. He hit rock bottom, and it was there, in the absolute silence of his shattered life, that he found a copy of the Enchiridion Times of Epictetus, a book recommended by a physical therapist who saw the war raging inside him. He read the words of a man who had been born a slave, who had a crippled leg, and who had discovered a freedom more profound than any king's. Epictetus spoke to him across 2 millennia. He read, "Some things are in our control and others not. The things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. The things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions." For Leo, this was a revelation. He realized he had spent his entire life fighting the wrong war. He had been trying to conquer the world, but he had never even tried to conquer himself. The injury was not his choice. The end of his career was not his choice, but his response to it, his bitterness, his anger, his despair, that was his choice. This was his new battlefield. He began the slow, arduous work of applying the principles. He started a journal, like Marcus Aurelius, to dissect his own thoughts. When a wave of anger at his physical limitations washed over him, he would stop and write it down. He would challenge the judgment, "My life is over because I can't be a soldier. Is that true? Or is it just one chapter that has closed? What is in my control right now? I can control my breathing. I can control my attitude toward my physical therapy. I can control whether I treat my family with kindness or with bitterness." He began to see his rehabilitation not as a prison sentence, but as a Stoic forge. Every painful stretch, every frustrating setback was an opportunity to practice patience and resilience. He started to redefine strength. It was no longer about how much weight he could lift or how fast he could run. It was about his ability to endure, to remain calm in the face of adversity, to choose a rational and virtuous response over an emotional, self-destructive one. He rebuilt himself from the inside out. He found a new purpose in mentoring other wounded veterans, using his own experience not as a source of bitterness, but as a wellspring of empathy and wisdom. The man who emerged from that fire was calmer, stronger in character, and more profoundly confident than the swaggering soldier who had entered it. He had lost a leg and a career, but he had gained his own soul. He had learned that the ultimate sign of foolishness, the one that underpins all the others, is the failure to learn from your own suffering. This is the final, and perhaps most crucial, sign of the man living in unreason. He never learns from his mistakes. He is trapped in a loop of repetition, a prisoner of his own unexamined history. He makes the same bad financial decisions, enters into the same toxic relationships, and reacts with the same self-sabotaging anger again and again, expecting a different outcome each time. Life, in its brutal mercy, keeps sending him the same lesson, packaged in different circumstances. But he refuses to open the package. He is too busy cursing the mailman. Mistakes are not the enemy. They are data. They are feedback from reality, telling us that our approach, our judgment, or our understanding is flawed. The wise man treasures his mistakes. He studies them like a scholar studies a sacred text. He performs a post-mortem on his failures, not to wallow in guilt, but to extract the lesson. He asks, "Where did my thinking go wrong? What unexamined assumption led me down this path? What habit of mind or action contributed to this failure?" He uses pain as a whetstone to sharpen his character. The man of unreason does the opposite. He buries his mistakes, denies them, or blames them on others. Because his ego is built on the need to be right, admitting a mistake feels like a form of death. And so, he is doomed to repeat it. The lesson will get louder each time. The failed relationship will be more painful, the financial loss more devastating, the career setback more catastrophic. Life will keep turning up the volume until the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. For some, that moment of awakening, like it did for the carpenter David, finally comes. For others, tragically, it never does. They go to their graves cursing a fate they unknowingly authored themselves. And often, the root cause of this inability to learn is a simple, profound failure: the failure to listen. The man of unreason loves the sound of his own voice. He dominates conversations, interrupts constantly, and rarely asks a meaningful question unless it's to set up his own monologue. Listening requires humility. It requires the temporary suspension of one's own ego. It requires the willingness to entertain the possibility that someone else might know something you don't. These are all things the man of unreason cannot tolerate. His constant talking is a smokescreen, a wall of noise to protect him from the terrifying silence in which he might have to confront his own ignorance. The wise man, in contrast, cultivates silence. He listens more than he speaks. He knows that when he is speaking, he is only repeating what he already knows. When he is listening, he has the chance to learn something new. He seeks out perspectives that challenge his own. He is not afraid of being wrong. He is afraid of staying wrong. He understands that true respect is not earned by having the loudest voice in the room, but by having the most open mind. Because he can listen, he can learn, and because he can learn, he can grow. A man who cannot listen is a man who cannot change. So now we return to where we began, to the prison with no walls. We have seen its architecture, the 6 pillars that hold up its invisible roof, the illusion of knowledge, the refusal of responsibility, the chaos of uncontrolled emotion, the comfort of a reinforcing crowd. the empty chase for pleasure, and the stubborn refusal to learn from life's lessons. These are not separate flaws, they are all symptoms of one underlying condition: living unconsciously, being a stranger to your own mind. The good news, the radical and liberating promise of Stoicism, is that awareness is a choice. The moment you begin to truly see these patterns in yourself, not in others, that is easy and useless, but in times yourself times is the moment you are no longer the fool. The moment you can observe your own anger rising without being consumed by it, the moment you can catch yourself about to blame someone and instead ask, "What is my part in this?" And the moment you choose the discomfort of growth over the comfort of stagnation, that is the moment you begin to walk free. So, let me ask you the question I promised you at the beginning, the master key that unlocks the door to this prison. It is a question to be asked in the face of any challenge, any frustration, any decision. Before you act, before you speak, before you surrender to an emotion, pause and ask this simple, powerful question: is this within my control? Is the opinion of my boss within my control? No, but the quality of my work is. Is the traffic jam within my control? No, but my patience and my choice of what to listen to in the car is. Is the fact that I was hurt in the past within my control? No, but how I choose to integrate that pain into my character as a source of wisdom and empathy, or as a justification for bitterness and fear, is absolutely within my control. This one question, applied relentlessly, is the chisel that can dismantle the prison of unreason, stone by stone. It is the compass that will always point you back to the source of your own power, your faculty of choice. It will not make your life easy, it will make you strong. Do not be the man who believes he knows everything. Be the man who is always willing to learn. Do not be the man who blames the world. Be the man who takes ownership of his own mind. Do not be a slave to your passions. Be the master of your responses. Choose your company with the care of a man choosing his fate, because that is what you are doing. Seek not the fleeting distraction of pleasure, but the deep, abiding fulfillment of a life of purpose and virtue. And when you fail, as you will, do not despair. Study your failure. Learn its lesson. Let it be the teacher that guides you toward wisdom. Stay curious, stay humble, and never ever stop the work of building your inner citadel. The world has enough men adrift on the sea of circumstance, calling their drift fate. Be the exception. Be the captain. The path of the Stoic is a daily practice, not a destination. We have spoken today of recognizing the patterns of unreason, but recognition is only the first step. The next is to build the proactive habits of a rational mind. One of the most powerful tools for this is what the ancients called times premeditatio malorum asterisk, the premeditation of evils, a practice of strategic pessimism designed not to foster anxiety, but to build an unshakable resilience. It is the art of preparing for the storm, not in fear, but in wisdom, ensuring that when the winds rise, your ship is ready. And that is a journey for another time.